We interrupt your regularly scheduled Apocalypse Studs broadcast to bring you an important notice. This episode was recorded in real life, deep in the bowels of Baltimore, Maryland, far from the relative safety of a video chat or a Zoom call. Thusly, there may be audio aberrations and other glitches in this episode, but fear not, you are in no danger, and your brave hosts only expose themselves to minor peril to conduct this interview. We know you will enjoy it. Hi, I'm Connor Fowler.
And I'm Matt Smith.
Welcome to Apocalypse Studs. Today is a very special show. We are joined by Kevin Kallaugher, former Brighton Bears basketball club star, award-winning editorial cartoonist for The Economist and the Baltimore Sun, among many other titles and accolades. Cal, thank us on this beautiful March day, the first day of spring.
It's great to be with you guys.
Yeah, welcome, man. Thanks for coming and hanging out with us. And this is also special because Connor and I are actually in this exact same place for the first time ever recording a show.
Right. We're in the same building, so this is pretty funny. So we'll start at the very beginning, I think, and where you came from. Where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up in Norwalk, Connecticut, which is in the kind of suburban ring near New York City. It's about an hour from New York City. And yeah, I grew up, and I'm an older gent. I was born in 1955, so my early formative years were in the 60s and 70s.
Nice. Yeah,
And so
I
what did
imagine.
No, go on.
I was gonna say I imagine being close to New York in the 60s and 70s and coming of age around that time had to be really fun.
It was a really, really, really interesting time. I mean,
Yes.
I suppose all times are interesting, but there's something iconic because I think the shift from my parents' generation to my generation was a much larger lurch than it has been for my generation to your generation.
Certainly.
So what did you wear while you were growing up? I mean, I guess we're interested in it all, but if there's a particular thing that stands out to you.
Well, I would probably describe my early years, that is up till the age of about 13, is being in New England Catholic realm, and so relatively conservative, but it was also at a time, and I want to paint this picture for you guys. This was a time when there was not a lot of variety available. You know, there was only one kind of jeans. There was certain. I was when I was in eighth grade, seventh grade, and I was playing basketball. There was one shoe, it was a Converse. There was no other shoes that you could wear, and so there was in some ways, there was a kind of a uniform that people would wear if they were middle class white Americans, and that's kind of pretty much where I was.
So what did you wear growing up?
So I, growing up in New England Catholic family, a large Catholic family, that that's precisely what my wardrobe was, New England Catholic, which meant that it was, pretty conservative, buttoned down, and we would, we spent a lot of time playing, of course, so that meant as kids it was just kind of jeans, t-shirts, nothing special at all. There was like no sort of sense of style or attention to detail. But in my early years was also a lot of changes took place in the American clothing landscape. When I was young, there was one kind of jean that people could wear, and there was branding had only just started for like clothing. My first one that I really remember strongly was the alligator for Lacoste. That would became a giant symbol
Right.
and a recognizable brand that people kind of saw, and that's besides the typical American stuff that people were just seeing all the time. But also in my school, my grammar school, growing up a Catholic school, we had a uniform we had to wear. We would have a blue blazer, gray pants, white shirt, tie. So a spectacular change or shall I say, eruption in my my how I conceived of clothing took place when I became a freshman in high school, where I was at again, as a Catholic boys' school, Jesuit school, called Fairfield Prep, which is like Loyola High School here in Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
And but the key thing was is that they used to have a uniform, but when I was a freshman, everything was changed so that you had to wear a jacket and tie, but you didn't have any restrictions about color or style. So I would go into class and then I'd see guys with all different colors on their clothing, from olives and greens and browns, and ties that were wide and narrow, lapels that were giant and small, bell bottoms and straight legs. And so all of this stuff came in, and it was a revelation. And you go, wow, this is so cool. And so my freshman year, however, when I arrived, my wardrobe had been chosen by my mom, and I went with her, was basically echoing where we come from. But the next year, I wanted a say in my wardrobe, and so this was the time with opportunity for playing around. So that was a really interesting time for my perception about clothing. The second thing was, I mentioned to you that I was playing basketball, and the world of basketball, and as we know now, sports and basketball is, leads in fashion making of sorts. In those days, it's such in its infant state. And I saw how, in the course of about 5 years, from I was about 13 to about age 18, how the styling of people playing basketball changed as more shirts came out representing schools. Schools started branding, and so you could have different types of shirt colors and combinations. Shorts, the sizes of shorts changed. The socks you wore, and then most importantly, of course, the shoes went from just one brand to about 4 or 5 brands. Nike came along and Adidas came along, and people would then pay attention. Guys would pay attention to what other guys are wearing because it meant something. It wasn't just the branding, but it said something about you. The choice that you made of your shoes made a difference about how you regarded yourself and how you wanted other people to see you. Then, as I started playing more and more basketball, uh, I was learning that when you start to play pickup basketball, you go down to a playground or you go to a gym and there's 30 people there. And your job is you want to stay and play on the court as long as possible. And the teams that win stay on the court. So when you try to assemble a team of 5 players made up of people that you didn't know, how would you judge their quality of their play? Part of your decision was by what they were wearing, because you could tell, okay, look at that guy's shoes. How, that's a really nice set of shoes. Is his game up to those shoe level? I mean, you don't get a game, you do not buy a pair of shoes that's way above your playing level, because it'll make you look like an idiot. And then you saw the kind of clothes to make you feel understood that they had a notion of what the quality players would be like. And so you were constantly assessing people in a way that I had never done before. So it was a great education.
Man, that's a very cool origin story about about like learning and evolving and finally like paying attention.
Mm.
Yeah. When and why did you start going by Cal?
Well, my last name is Kallaugher, as you
Right.
know. And when I went to high school, I had an older brother who was 3 years older than me. So when I was a freshman, he was a senior. And when I got to school, everyone called my brother John Cal, as a short name
Right.
and I was Little Cal,
Okay.
I was Little Cal. And then
Mm-hmm.
I was doing cartoons as well, so I'd sign them Cal. But then when he graduated, I lost the moniker of Little and I suddenly became Cal. And I've owned it ever since. He's never tried to fight it back. We haven't done an arm wrestling match or anything to see who actually has ownership of it. But
Who's the true Cal?
who's the true Cal?
I'm gonna say this is going ahead a little bit, but so your own clothing journey, for lack of a better term, that term, but
Right.
for lack of a better term, you had a little nature and a little nurture, right?
Yeah.
Guided by the hand of capital in a way. You were guided by advertising. The branding was effective. There's
Yeah.
there's like all sorts of perception things at stake. So I just
Yes.
wanted to note that, which is that I wonder if you are aware of the popularity of Ivy style, quote unquote, days. We know that you went to school in Boston at the
Yep.
Ivy League institution,
Right.
and we were your experiences with Ivy League style.
Yeah. It's so fascinating to me because, I've been, out of college for now nearly 50 years, and I've seen Ivy style go up in popularity, go back down, come back up, and it's very interesting why, and trying to figure out why, what is it that makes people warm to it. So when I was there, remember, I was there in the 70s, mid 70s.
Yeah, you kind of hit the
And
tail end of like the golden age of
yeah,
like
that's right.
tailored
Of this,
clothing.
yeah, oh boy, and that's such a shame because it would have been just, love to have taken full advantage of that.
Right,
So,
right.
so I go there and, but I go to Harvard with not much budget as a, from, personal issue. So the notion of trying to do anything above and beyond what was required to just kind of survive in that environment meant that I couldn't be imaginative. However, I was surrounded by a lot of people with money who were now buying and coming, roommates who could dress really well. And in fact, one of the great things was that my college roommate, his father ran a clothing store in Pittsburgh. And whenever he came to visit us, he would bring me clothes,
Did you know
figure
that?
out what my size was. It was, well, they had three stores. One of them I remember was called High, Wide, and Handsome, and it
Nice.
was a size for plus size guys and so on. And it was a very popular, but it was a family run thing. And so when he, was moving on, he sold off the business. It probably was absorbed by some big chain or something. But it was a great, great family business. And this guy, again, woke me to the notion of more details about clothing, types of collars and, quality of cotton in the shirts and things like that, I wouldn't have learned otherwise. And then there was all these finishing clubs at Harvard, right? And these are, clubs that mostly inhabited in those days, at least, by, the kind of the white aristocracy of America, and you had to be invited, and they had cocktail party. I mean, I'd never been to a cocktail party, and I was 18 going to a cocktail bar, surrounded by guys, mostly guys, being served drinks by black folks in white jackets and stuff, and it just seemed so incredibly uncomfortable and
Right.
so of another era. It was just the whole thing. So I kind of shied away from warming toward that style because I found it as generically representing something that I didn't feel like I was a part of. So my attire changed from New England Catholic to college jock, basically.
Okay.
And I was, wearing sweatshirts and, and I was, in and out of the gym all the time. So I had probably more t-shirts than I had, other kind of stylish clothes. But that didn't mean that, when you were having an opportunity to socialize with members of the opposite sex, you wanted to look your best.
Certainly.
So
Certainly.
I'd try to have some clothes that would be respectable.
Yeah.
But a big change, however, that happened to me was immediately after graduating. I literally within a week, I was on an airplane going to Europe, where I was leading a bicycle tour of American teenagers for 5 weeks in Ireland, England, and Scotland. And then when the tour finished, I stayed. I cycled around England and Ireland and eventually got a job playing semi-pro basketball and lived in England for 9 years. And so my experience then changed. My perception of clothes changed dramatically when I was living in a foreign culture. And when unlike today, this before the internet, before all sorts of uh, ways that people perceived Americans abroad. Today it was a lot different back then. That I looked like an American. People saw me. They did. People hadn't met Americans. A lot of people didn't. I was like their first American that they met, and they were cool with it. You felt special, and I
Yeah.
wasn't wearing. I was just wearing American jeans and a Harvard sweatshirt or whatever. They just thought this is so cool.
Right.
And
Right.
but then came a point where I had lived there for a long enough. I had kids. I was married. That I didn't want to be American so much. I wanted to kind of fit in to the whatever was going on in Britain at the time, and my style changed, or I started getting more tweed stuff, and I was my my choice of I wasn't wearing sneakers anymore. And sweatshirts were definitely out. Everything was kind of shifting and changing. So that was a big kind of moment for me.
Yeah. And so
It's
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say it's interesting that at the height of wealth is
dressing like you're going to the gym.
and I mean that has a little bit been aspirational. Like the truly wealthy are not wearing fine tailored clothing. They're wearing
Yeah,
joggers that cost $2,000 and
right.
whatever sneaker is of the moment.
I
That has
know.
been an interesting shift as well.
Oh God, yeah. To me when I see it, it's so crazy to me. It's just so crazy to me.
So, Cal, how would you describe your style as an adult? And we would be remiss if we did not mention your love of waistcoats.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Well, right now, I am a cartoonist, which means that it's a pretty special designation. I mean, when you tell somebody you're a cartoonist, you can see their eyebrows go up. They've never met a cartoonist before. It's kind of fun. It's definitely special. Even when you go through security at airports, or they're checking your passport, you say, okay, what do you do? I say, I'm a cartoonist. These are guys who hear thousands of people go by with all sorts of, when they say cartoonist, their eyes come up and look at you because
Right.
it's so unusual. But it also means that it gives you permission to be different, and it gives you permission to be playful in people's eyes.
Right.
And also that kind of plays into my personality anyways. So I've always my style has evolved as being a combination of many of my past elements. That there's a bit of old English in me that I like. There's a bit of the relaxed informality that you get of playing sports and being in that jock world, a degree of formality that I got, working for The Economist. It's a very established organization. And then I have had a big impact in my life by my wife, who's English, and she is also an artist. And she knows me, and so she's always encouraged me to, try and experiment with various different things. And then my mom, who had a lovely color palette, and I have the same kind of color palette, which was full of energy, and I really like that. So, well, how does that express myself in my looks? Well, I have a collection of waistcoats that I've been building up for now probably a couple of decades, which I love. Hopefully, use them for most chances. But it all started with socks because for the longest time, men didn't have an opportunity to express themselves with color or imagination or creativity. There was a uniform of what you had to wear, and I always wanted to have crazy socks. And I do a lot of public speaking. I'm on the circuit, and I remember when I first started, 20 years ago, if I had a crazy pair of socks, and the whole audience would notice it, and they go, "Wow, that's crazy! Look, there's a cartoonist. Look at those socks." Well, now crazy socks are everywhere, right? And it means nothing special. But I just want to tell folks there was a time when that wasn't the way it was. So I usually have imaginative socks. I got a great bunch of funky shirts that I really like that I've gotten from a variety of different places. Matching a funky shirt with a waistcoat can be a little tricky at times. So
Certainly.
I do have some solid shirts that go with tricky waistcoats, and then I have crazy shirts that go with solid waistcoats. That kind of thing. So you got to work that out.
Could you describe your waistcoat, shirt, scarf matching that was going on today?
Oh yeah. So well, I have there's a store in France, in Paris. I was there doing an event, and it was February, and it was freaking cold. It was frigid. And my wife and I are kind of wandering around the streets, and she says to me, wherever the next store we pass, we're going in to get warm. Okay. And we turn this corner, and it's this tiny shirt shop. It must have only been about 10 feet wide, 20 feet deep. It's just like that, lined with, all these really creative, fun shirts. And the company is called Coton Deux, COTONDOUX. And she said, try on some shirts while I get warm. So, well, we walked out of there with 3 shirts, and it's a great place. And ever since then, I have bought, I probably have a dozen of their shirts because you can get them easily online. And I highly recommend people go check them out. And they're very reasonable. But I had a particular favorite that I love from them, and it's a colorful one, and it's all. You imagine spray cans, right? That people do graffiti with spray cans. Imagine if you flip it up so you only see the top of the spray can, but the color of that top of the spray can is apparent. Well, this one is a shirt with hundreds of spray can tops
Oh,
on
that's
it,
cool.
and the
Yeah.
colors all pop together, so it gives a lot of life. And the amount, I tell you what, I have so many times I've worn this shirt. I have been stopped in the streets by guys and gals. Great shirt, or you walking by, nice shirt, and that doesn't happen very often that people just walk by and say nice shirt. And in fact, Matt, I know you're from Atlanta, right? I think I
Right.
was in Atlanta at a convention or something, like getting coffee, and this guy walks up to me and starts talking to me about my shirt. He says, "That is the most amazing shirt." And so I love that shirt. And then, but as a result, there's only a couple of waistcoats that I have currently that kind of work with it. So I got a nice blue waistcoat. I don't remember where I got it. Or I think I got it here. Yeah, so that was my choice.
Nice. Just a rough estimate. How many waistcoats do you think you own?
Well, it's funny you should ask, Matt, because I did a cull.
Okay.
Cull.
All right.
Great
Recently, about
waistcoat cull.
the
Vest
great waistcoat
cull.
cull, the waistcoat 2 weeks ago, and at that point I had 55,
Okay. All right.
and now I've got 33.
Wow, Cal.
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
Cal, where did you put them all?
Well,
Damn.
well, my daughter said that she wants them. I'm not sure what she plans to do with them, but yeah. No, I've got all sorts. I got all sorts.
That's amazing. Well, so you're a collector too. I want about the nature versus nurture thing. I
Yeah.
imagine you wanted us to bring that up on the show because you had some thoughts about it. I have thoughts, but it is a little bit of a cop out. I would just say that nature and nurture sort of equally vie for importance as your clothing.
Yes. I think you're exactly right there. Um, I suppose one of the things about the nurture side of it is that I, I reckon that there's a lot of people in the world who don't have an opportunity. Either they're not surrounded by people who can help develop or finely tune people's understanding of what works for them. But I've always been fascinated about cultures all around the world, even in ancient times. People wanted to adorn themselves with attractive, interesting, compelling colors and designs. And it's because as a result, so it's kind of innate. But I've always been fascinated about how they've evolved over time. What's made things, as societies change their colors and so on. And then bringing it to today with the internet, how is all these variety of cultures and colors and so on spreading faster because of the internet and penetrating corners of the world that would have never seen or experienced, what's available in looks these days.
Oh my God. They like the people who I would say that I know these people. I've never met them in real life, but we talk very often, who I know in all kinds of places.
Mm,
Canada and Sweden and in California, all over the
mm,
country, and we're able to talk to each other about the thing that we care about,
mm.
which we were not do. I mean, we all kind of came up on these fashion forums,
Right,
and now for the most part, people use Instagram,
right.
but it has been a hugely uniting force.
Yes, yeah, yeah, and a good one, I think. I mean, it's really fantastic.
Yeah,
It's really
I
fantastic.
think kind of to your point about styles and things spreading. Also, like you mentioned how your mom influenced your taste,
Yeah,
and so now it's possible that if you don't have that kind of like personal influence, you can
yeah,
find
yes,
someone that looks cool, and you're like,
yeah, yeah,
oh,
yeah,
it's such an interesting like time period, I think, for clothing in general.
yes, yes,
And
yeah,
if I feel like there's if you want to look a certain way, you can do it.
right, right, right,
Provided you of course have the means or
right,
whatnot. But like also going thrifting and putting together something that
yeah,
takes inspiration from what you saw.
yes,
Like these are
exactly.
things that you didn't have growing up.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is that I lived in a kind of a clothing desert,
Right.
and it wasn't just the area I lived in. It's just that the times had that, and so today it's just so fantastic. It's a cornucopia of what's available.
Yeah. Perfect description of it. So getting into your art,
Mm.
when did you realize that your artistic skills were something that you could make a living off of?
Well, when I used to draw a lot when I was a little kid, and I did cartoons for my high school paper. And I always kind of wanted to be a cartoonist. As it turns out, the county that I lived in suburban, outside of New York, there's a lot of cartoonists that lived there. They all came there after World War
Oh,
II. They kind of settled into that area, and then a bunch of them got together and started this cartoon museum down in Greenwich, Connecticut at the time. And I went down and volunteered. As a
okay,
young kid, I was like 14, 15. So I met cartoonists. And so I could suddenly think, oh, yeah, I could do this. When most of the people, if you've never had that opportunity, would never dream of it.
right,
And um, and so then when I went to university, and I was studying art, I started studying all sorts of things. But my final senior thesis was a 13-minute long animated cartoon based on a comic strip that I had in the college paper. And so I started to have dreams that could possibly be true of maybe making my life as a cartoonist. But in those days, I was going to do a comic strip like Doonesbury.
right,
And so that was my feeling. Or I did get offered a job at an animation studio right out of college. In those days, of course, none of this computer stuff. My senior thesis was thousands of hand drawings. That took me forever. so but but immediately, like I said before, I went overseas immediately, and I also had always a fascination with caricature, and I used to do caricatures in the streets in Cambridge, and I was really bad, but I draw all my friends and stuff like that. And but then I started looking for cartooning jobs in London, and the basketball team was having financial trouble, and crazy as it sounds, my first job was with The Economist in London, you know, and they were looking for cartoonists when I kind of showed up, and it was just a kind of a freak of nature. And by getting my time, getting there, then I could get a work permit as and that allowed me to stay.
right.
And then I played 3 years, and I met my wife, and cartooning started to show up, and I mean it's crazy. The whole story is crazy, and I'm lucky as hell.
Hell yeah. So cartooning and caricature, there maybe is a not fine line between the two. So I was wondering what your process for doing a caricature is.
Mm, mm. Yeah, so a caricature to me is the capturing of an individual. And I'm going to actually tell you the quote, my favorite quote about caricatures from Annibale Carracci, who's an Italian Renaissance painter. And he said that a good caricature is more true to life than reality itself. So you try to get to the core, the source, the nub of an individual. And a caricature is not just of the face; it could be of the whole body because we know how people carry themselves. That tells a lot about the person, and the same way that clothes tell you about a person, their face does, and all the way they hold themselves. So for me, uh, I I got to get a fix on the individual I'm drawing if I can. But if I'm just going to be operating on how I'm going to break down a face, well, the most important feature that we have, surprisingly, is the shape of our head. I mean, each of our shapes of our head is unique, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a reason why you can recognize somebody from a distance or from behind.
Right.
And so you start with that shape. You got to get those shapes right. And then within the head, there's lots of other smaller shapes. And it's all about the shapes and how they relate to each other. The shapes within the forehead, for example, where certain muscles go, the shape of the eyes and the shape of the cheeks under the eyes. So you put all these things together, they suddenly an image and a special energy that's specific to that individual start to appear.
So you're reducing it in a way.
Yeah, you're distilling it, um, and then it's a combination. You're also carving the face because I always try to think in 3D. Some caricatures work in line and they're thinking about just the surface. I think about it as almost like I'm carving a head in 3D and molding it. Sometimes I'm building the head like adding clay to a bust, and other times I'm like chipping away at the model in order to create the different shapes. But I'm doing it in distortion for sure. In my caricatures, or way I like to deal with it is not in utter photographic realism, but in fact trying to have a little playfulness at the same time.
Yeah, one of the things that we like so much about your work, outside of the editorial, which is always incredible, is just the color. How do you select the colors to work with? How do you decide what's going to be more black and white and what's going to be a color that pops on a drawing?
Mm. So, color has mood. Color's got personality. You guys know this for sure, right? When you're talking about
Certainly.
clothing, the clothing choice. I mean, it communicates so much. I mean, this is the thing about our eyes, right? As humans, our eyes are absorbing so much information that we don't even know, right? And
Right.
trying to back up and trying to break down what our eyes are seeing and why it feels certain ways is one of the great things about dealing with any art. So when people choose certain clothing, sometimes they know that this color goes with that color because they've seen it done a million times. That helps. Well, the same thing with painting is that sometimes you try to become a student of color so that when I see an instance that I want to create, I go, oh, that green with that yellow here would create the mood that I'm looking at. So there's that. But I'm also going to bring you back to palette because my mom's palette constantly returns to my artwork where my palette is a more happier palette than some people's, and so I find that goes in. That's kind of my happy place to be when I'm making something, creating something. I have a default group of colors that I will work with. But I think really what I like to think is that my color is not just coloring in, right? It's not like we're just doing black and white, dropping color in.
Right.
That sometimes is a thing that happens these days, particularly with computers, is that it's easy to drop in color, but it's more nuanced, and that part of that is because I love to do it in watercolor. Because I work in watercolors allows you to have many more varieties of personality in the color.
Hmm.
How do you depict various personality traits in clothing?
Well, for me, the uh, clothing can be in the cartoon can be a prop more than anything else. Although sometimes, people have iconic clothing that they wear deliberately, and because I'm dealing with public figures,
Sure.
they have so many stylists working them, so they get an iconic look, and then they don't break from the look that's part of their deal.
Right.
And so yeah, I capture that, but really, what's interesting, because I'm dealing in ridicule largely, then what happens is that I take that where their chosen look, and then I make fun of it, or I diminish it. You make the sleeves go a little bit too high up their arm or too far down. In Donald Trump's case, you drop the sleeve so that it's like halfway down his hand, and his fingers are barely appearing underneath, right? And or the way that everyone does stuff with his tie, making it so long that it kind of drags behind him and things like
Which
that.
is barely caricature. Because that is just how he looks.
It's crazy. I mean, seriously, who's advising him? Of course, he doesn't listen to anybody, anyways.
Right.
Yeah,
but
nobody.
But that is, I mean, really, seriously.
Yeah, he has a unique ability to make what I'm assuming is probably $5,000 or $6,000 suit look like it came from Joseph Banks.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. That takes talent.
It takes a lot of talent. That's right. That's right.
So, Cal, who are some of your favorites that you have or like to draw? International figures, presidents.
Interesting. Well, I'll give you two answers for this. The first answer, I think it's going to be surprising everybody, is that it's always the current president of the United States.
Okay. Yeah.
And the reason why that is because their faces are changing a lot when they're in office.
Oh,
because the pressure of the job makes them age exponentially. Even Joe Biden has got less vim in his vimless face.
I mean, I remember seeing pictures of Obama like at the beginning of his presidency and at the end, and it was shocking.
Yes.
Like I'd never really thought about that, but obviously you have.
Yeah, their faces change exponentially, I think. And I tell people it's a combination of gravity and gravitas working together on their face. So it is so I love watching their face. Plus that I get to know their face better than I know my own face.
Right.
Because I look at them for like 3 or 4 hours at a time, because when I'm drawing, I have photos of them on my screen in front of me. And in fact, I don't know about you guys. I mean, I look at them for like 3 or 4 hours at a time. I only look at my own face for like 1 or 2 hours at a time. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah.
So,
maybe two.
Maybe two. Yeah. So it's one of these things where that it's a fantastic journey working with whoever's present. So then as a result, I now have a collection of, because I've been drawing presidents since Ronald Reagan. That amongst that crew, I have a few favorites.
Okay.
Bill Clinton was one, and it's to see his face age tremendously in his time.
Yeah,
but he had this.
He looks like a cartoon in real life.
Exactly. Exactly. He was just like a cartoon. Ronald Reagan was very interesting to draw because he had a very animated face. He was, rubbery. He was an actor, so he could really put on all sorts of moods, and it meant that you could take a ball of string and drop his hairdo on top of it, and you can make it look like Ronald Reagan. Just as simple as that.
Yeah.
And so those are things but and also, by the way, that was in contrast to Margaret Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain at the time, who had exactly one expression.
Yep.
Yeah, and she just was like this. It's like a frozen. Her face was frozen in time. So that was
like a robotic dog.
Yes, exactly. So but new guys come along all the time, and today I think drawing the Chinese leader Xi has been interesting, because at first people have, one of the things when you're doing caricatures and cartoons, you're helping educate your audience as to what these people look like.
Right.
Because they look at the photos, they're not paying attention, but the caricature is paying attention. And so if you do a nice, a good strong caricature of them, people start to see all the parts of their face. So that's really interesting.
The Economist is a conservative publication, and I would think that cartoons are at odds with that. And so I was wondering how it's been to make your way at the Economist doing.
Mm. So the Economist is kind of, it's conservative-ish. What I mean is it's more liberal in the old tradition of what a liberal is that they were basically established because of free trade. Free trade is their big thing, but open government. I mean, it surprises people, but the Economist endorses legalization of all drugs, for example.
Okay.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they want control of guns. And they have um, supported for president in the past. I think for past four elections, they've backed the Democrats, for president. But they're certainly if it was an American spectrum, they'd be more in the middle. But they're definitely a strong pro-capitalist. So in that regard, they could be considered to be conservative. But on social issues, they're on the left of center. So it's an interesting, it's a kind of idiosyncratic organization. I support them in many things. I was particularly against the Iraq War, the first and second Iraq War. But they were for them, but they have since kind of recanted on the second one.
Okay.
But
Mm-hmm.
anyways, for me, they give me a lot of freedom. They give me an awful lot of freedom. I've kind of, I guess, earned it over time. And then I kind of know the areas where I maybe won't tread because it's not doesn't kind of fit into their mix. But I do one cartoon a week for them. That's an editorial cartoon. Then I do an illustration for them every week. And there's only been over my 45 years with them one or two instances where I just wouldn't do a cartoon because what was going to be required was not going to fit my perspective. But it may be also about being married. The two of us have been married for 45 years, so over time I've become more like them. They've become more like me. I don't know.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we read a little
That's
bit
a
about
great
an organ.
answer.
Yeah, it really is. And also, that seems like a pretty good track record of only a couple of things that
Yeah.
you know, have gone against your
Well, they're
values.
not conservative like the Republican Party. They're conservative
No.
publication from.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
That's right. Yeah. 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 And yeah, I think because the political spectrum in the UK is a lot different than it is.
You as well.
So, Cal, we were reading about an organization that you led that protected political cartoonists internationally,
Right.
Cartoons Rights Network.
Mm.
Could you tell us a little bit about that and kind of what your experience with that org was?
Mm. Well, here in the U.S., we forget just how lucky we are to have the ability to express our own thoughts in the open. And cartoonists, particularly, are kind of in the front line of freedom of expression. Uh, it could get cartoonists in trouble here, but abroad, it's particularly difficult. And a recent report from a place called Freedom House, which judges the amount of freedom of expression and journalism that is around the world. Only about 15% of the world's population live in a place where there's freedom of the press, and that also
Yeah.
neatly, I think, overlaps with the amount of places in the world where cartoonists can draw their own head of state. Right? You just
Right.
cannot dare draw your own head of state. So as a result, in these kind of very ticklish times and intolerant times with demagogues everywhere, cartoonists have been around the globe routinely um, jailed, tortured, and murdered for what they do.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
so an organization was started, I think, about 20 years ago now, by basically an overseas aid worker, American, who was working in a variety of different countries, and found that the cartoonists were coming up to him and looking for help. Cartoonists are their families to try to help them out of trouble that they're having with the governments. So when the guy came back, his name was Bro Russell. He came back. He reached out to me and some other people about trying to set up a forum that could bring not just raise money to help these people in their own micro issues they have there, but also an advocacy group that could then shine a spotlight on the problems that are going on in other places, and maybe get other organizations and other governments to step in and then protect the cartoonists in question and other journalists. And so over time, we've saved cartoonists, smuggled some people out of countries that they were in danger of being, targeted. We have done a lot of. We've had cartoonists who've had to. We go. Sorry, we do an annual award basically that brings attention to certain cartoonists and raises their profile and makes them so that they're a bit hotter for anyone to try to take them on within their own country because they know basically the world is watching.
Right.
So that's a great honor for me to do this. I've met many of these cartoonists from all around the globe. I'm so impressed by the bravery of these individuals. If I was in their shoes, I'm not sure I would do the same thing that they're doing. It's really remarkable because they're the freedom fighters in their own country, putting their lives and their families in danger in order to use cartoons, which are a very potent weapon, particularly in societies where literacy is not very high. The cartoons can go places that the words can't.
Certainly.
And it's really something.
Man, you were carrying on the some of my favorite cartoons that I've seen are like the old Union cartoons and whatnot, and I feel like you guys are carrying that torch these days.
Yeah, and that's what cartoons can do. So I'm very honored to be in this profession.
Just out of curiosity, did you guys ramp up things after the Charlie Hebdo incident, or was that just kind of business as usual for what you guys do?
Well, yeah. So the Charlie Hebdo, just kind of remind people, was that it was over 5 years ago, coming up to 6 years, maybe 6 years ago, when some gunmen basically broke into Charlie Hebdo, which was this French satirical magazine that had done lots of articles and images critical of Prophet Muhammad, and people took offense and they came in with their automatic weapons and gunned down 5 cartoonists and some other folks as well. And then it caused a gigantic reaction of people in support of freedom of expression. They had these large marches. They had heads of states going to Paris doing all this stuff. But the sad thing is that all of that enthusiasm has quickly waned as other things came, across everyone's bow, including the coronavirus and so on. So, the thing about cartooning, as we've known it throughout history, the future has been intricately bound to the future of newspapers, and newspapers are fading fast.
Right.
So the cartooning, as we've already known it, is under threat in ways that we're not used to. I don't think satire is under threat. I think we live in a time of ever increasing and healthy satire appearing everywhere on the internet, but cartoons harder. Now, of course, my cartoons are more widely seen today than ever before, thanks to the web. And I think that I'm one of the lucky ones that can still have that. But if I was starting out now, I think my path to becoming a cartoonist would be much more difficult than it was way back in the days.
Right.
That's what a lot of people say. When I met Steny Hoyer, that's what he said. It's hard out there. About the covers, you probably have covered The Economist more than anybody. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. I probably done 150 covers over the years. I have done less so recently because the style. It's interesting talking about clothing as a style, but imagery as a style can also come into play. And because of the introductions of computer-generated artwork, has changed the way that people perceive graphics. And so they don't use as much illustration on the graphics anymore, but they do a lot of computer-generated artwork. So I've done less of those more recently, but I did, had a great run there of creating all these covers, and some of them, classics that, really embodied some of the main important things that have gone on in history for several decades. But I do have one fun story of doing a cover, Thomas, that back in the day, again, this was a while back, it's probably in the 90s now, when we first moved from England to the United States, and they wanted me to do a cover. What they would do is on Monday they have a meeting in London, They decide on the cover. They talk to me, and I would then work on it until Tuesday midday, and then a courier would come to my house, pick up the artwork, and then fly overnight to London to be there by Wednesday, because Wednesday is the press day for The Economist. So everything went well for several years, but then one day, the courier came, picked up the artwork, and never showed up the next day in London with the artwork. And they were the magazine was petrified because everything was on tight schedules. In those days, they were sending plates via Concorde to the Far East, and they called me up in a panic and said, "What can we do?" And so I quickly grabbed the pencil sketch that I'd done of the artwork, threw a little bit of ink on it. I then blew it up on a photocopy machine, and sent over 6 pieces of the artwork by fax. And then they then taped it together, and then they photographed it, and then they spray painted it quickly, and that went on the cover, and it was awful, right? It was a real tragedy. So they called me back the next day and said, "Look, in the future, we cannot take any chances about this happening anymore. So when we want you to do a cover, uh, we want you to find a friend of yours to take the cover over for us so that they can guarantee it be delivered." So
Right.
suddenly we had so many friends because everybody wanted to go to London for free on the Economist dime. But the funny thing is that, as it turns out, very few people can drop everything they're doing on 24 hours notice and go to London for 5 days,
Right.
surprisingly. So we would have a list of, I don't know, 20 people, and go down that list, and it was really hard to find people sometimes. So anyways, that was in the day when they did that sort of thing.
Do you know what ever happened to that piece of art? Like, it never showed up anywhere?
It did show up later in the day, but showed up way too late.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, but the thing was that really hurt the economists was that they're bullshitting. They're telling economists like, "Oh no, it's landed. We've got it here." It's just, and they did this for several hours when every minute mattered,
Right.
And if we had known, 5 or 6 hours earlier that had done something more.
Right. Do you have a favorite cartoon that you've done? I'm sure with the amount that you've done over the years, that's
Yeah.
probably a loaded question. But
Yeah, actually, because I doing the math, I've done over 10,000 cartoons I've published.
good
But
gosh.
but I have one that has lasted the test of time, and it's been widely reproduced, and so in this way I'm fond of it. It's a cartoon about the stock market, and
Okay.
it's in um, it's 2 stages. So the first stage, there's a guy on the phone that says, "I got a stock here that could really excel." A person overhears him next to him says Excel, and the person after that says Excel, 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 sell, 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 right? And then the second
Right.
panel starts the same way, saying sell, sell, sell. A guy overhears this, says, "This is madness. I can't take anymore. Goodbye." And somebody says, "Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye, bye, 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 bye." And then so it's all about the madness of the stock market, and it's been reproduced over and over again, and it's just been great.
Yeah, that for everyone listening, you should certainly check that cartoon out.
We'll post it.
Yeah, we will post it. It is a great one.
Thank you.
So I was going to ask about pen and paper versus tablet and iPad.
Yes.
I do think we talked about that a little bit. Do you have pens or pencils that you like better than others? Do you have a paper stock that is your preference?
Well, I'll tell you a specific about a pen story, because pencils, I like using propelling pencils, so I don't have to sharpen them, which I guess what do you call them here?
Mechanical.
Mechanical pencils. Yeah, they call
Right.
them propelling in the UK. So those are great. And then my sketch paper is just like photocopy paper. But then I love painting on 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 certain kinds of beautiful paper. Cuthbert is one of my favorite. Um, but the pen story, I thought you guys would enjoy this. So I'm in the UK. I'm working at The Economist, and the art director there says, and I've only been there about a year or two, so I'm a young guy. I'm in my early 20s, and he says, what you need to do, you need to go visit Philip Poole at his Nibs, which is the name of his store, and it's a shop that sells only pen nibs, right? And I said, okay. So we figured out where it was, which is down near Piccadilly Circus. And I remember going down there, and the address was Shaftesbury. It might have been Shaftesbury Avenue, but it was like 33. And I was at the where 33 should be. I saw 35 over here, and I thought 31 over here, and then between them was a door, but no number on it or anything. So I was like, well, I guess that's 33, right? So I go up to the door and I open it up, and it was like going into something in Harry Potter world, right? The door kind of squeaked open, and inside was this room, dark room with inlaid into the walls all these, floor to ceiling shelves and doors that had tiny little windows in them, and so and then at the back of it was this desk, and nobody is sitting there. But I heard this kind of shuffle in the back room. I went, "Hello, anybody there?" And this little guy comes shuffling out. "What do you want?" I said, "Well, I was sent here about getting some nibs." So he asked me questions about what kind of drawing do I do and so on. And then he shoved to me a little box, 2 inches by an inch, packed full of maybe 20 different nibs. He says, "Try these, see if there's anyone that you like, and then come back to me." So I did. After over a couple of weeks, I would try them with different ink, and I came back and I kind of settled on one that I liked. And he said, "Great," and he went back and grabbed some more. And it was called George Hughes 1319. So this is a specific name. So I use this. I go visit Philip Poole every month or so, get a few more nibs, and I got to know him a little bit. He was a little less grumpy over time. And so fast forward about 5 or 6 years, I come to him. I said, "Phil, these nibs are just great. Can I get any more?" And he says, "I don't have any more. I'm sorry." I said, "Well, when are you going to get some in?" He says, "Get some in? They haven't been made for over 100 years." I said, "What?" So he says, "You'll be lucky to see any more of those." I said, "Oh no, that's tragic. I'm so sorry. I wish I'd taken more care of them." That kind of thing. So, anyways, I kind of found my way with something else, but nothing ever matched that. So before I left England to come to Baltimore, I went to see him one last time, and he says, "Give me your address," blah blah blah. And 2 years later, I get this beautiful letter from him in London. It says, someone in a basement somewhere, somebody stumbled upon this box of 144 of these 1319s. And so he says, "I'll buy the whole lot." And
Oh,
he
nice.
sent them to me. I still have them. I'm still working off of that. And that's been now, 30 years. I've been working with that same box. And I
You're taking
probably
care
only
of them
have,
better than the first go
I'll
around.
tell you, I'm only halfway through them, buddy. So I think I can go to 870 or 80. No, up 100. I think I can make it 100.
All right. All right. Well, to wrap up with our final question, a little existential, as we like to do on occasion. But if a young Cal could look into the future and see
Yeah.
Cal now,
Yeah.
what do you think that little dude would say?
Oh man, he would be. Oh God. Well, first of all, it would relieve an enormous amount of anxiety because when you're young, right, you're trying to
Right.
figure out what the fuck is going on. What am I going to do? Will I? And the big question is with that age, will I ever be a cartoonist? Or
Right.
could I sustain it? I mean, because it's basically an impossible dream to sort of say, "Oh, I'm going to do this." But I was like, I'm all in, and who knows where this is going to go. But he could see now, and I would love to talk with that young guy and tell him, "Don't worry, it's going to work. But work your ass off. It doesn't just come."
Right. Right.
But also just tell him you're on the right track, man. You're doing okay. And I think that the young guy would probably think the old guy is pretty cool.
Yeah.
This
I would
is
agree
not a
with
bad
that.
thing. It's not a bad way, man. You did all right.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, they'd be proud, and also, yeah, I think all of these things. I've been lucky, guys. I can tell you, unbelievable. What
Yeah.
lucky I've been.
Well, I mean, just from hanging out with you today, it couldn't have happened to a better person. So
Right.
much
Couldn't
obliged.
happen to a nicer guy.
yeah, yeah,
Well, I'm so happy. Thanks so much, guys.
yeah, man. Thank you for coming on, and this was a really fun conversation. And we always give our guests a chance to plug whatever they want to plug. So
Yeah. Oh,
it
good. Oh, good. Well, I'll start by plugging the Coton Do shirts. They're really good. I'd really highly
Nice.
recommend that. And then, go to my website, caltoons.com, and check out my cartoons there. Follow me on social media. On Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and you name it. Yeah, I mean, really support and spread the word because I mean, democracy thrives on satire, and I'm there, buddies. Follow me, please.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You're the man in the street. You are the man in the street with the satire.
Yep.
Yeah,
well,
man.
yeah. Thanks everyone for listening. Thank you again, Cal, for coming on. And I am Matt Smith at Rebels Rogues on Instagram.
And I'm Connor Fowler at Connor Fowler with one N.
If you have questions, comments, concerns, drop us a line either on Instagram at apocalypseduds or apocalypseduds@gmail.com. And yeah, we're out. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Cool.
This would be where the outro music would go. Do.